Imagine Paris at the dawn of the 20th century, a city brimming with artistic expression, scientific breakthroughs, and a palpable sense of progress. Cobblestone streets buzzed with horse-drawn carriages, and the air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread and brewing coffee. Yet, beneath this veneer of beauty and innovation, a silent, insidious terror was quietly taking root. It wasn't lurking in dark alleys or hidden corners, but rather flourishing in the most unexpected of places, the supposed safety and sanctity of family homes. Enter Jeanne Weber, a woman who on the surface appeared utterly unremarkable. A seemingly ordinary wife, a caring mother, and a trusted babysitter within her community. She was the last person anyone would suspect of harboring sinister secrets, but behind that facade of normalcy, a monstrous reality was brewing. Jeanne Weber would soon become infamous, etched in the annals of crime as a figure of unimaginable darkness, a predator hiding in plain sight. Her shocking case forced France to confront a deeply unsettling truth: that evil could wear the face of a caregiver, that the very people entrusted with protecting the vulnerable could be capable of unspeakable acts. This was a time when forensic science was still in its infancy, a far cry from the sophisticated techniques we rely on today. Child mortality rates were tragically high, and death, especially among infants, was often attributed to natural causes or simple misfortune. In this context, proving murder, particularly when the accused was a woman, seemed an almost insurmountable challenge. The legal system grappled with biases and societal expectations that clouded judgment and hindered the pursuit of justice. Investigators found themselves struggling to see past the deeply ingrained assumptions of the era, assumptions about the inherent nature of women and their perceived capacity for violence. The ensuing legal battles were a spectacle, a dramatic clash between emerging forensic techniques and deeply entrenched societal prejudices. These trials exposed the limitations of the justice system and captivated the attention of a nation hungry for answers. Jeanne Weber's story is more than just a crime narrative. It's a chilling blend of social history, a stark reminder of the challenges faced by early forensic science, and a gripping legal drama that continues to resonate today. This is the story of how trust was irrevocably shattered, how the unthinkable became reality, and how one woman's actions forever changed the way France viewed the potential for darkness lurking within its own homes. Jeanne Weber became known as Ogress de la Goutte-d'Or, the Ogress of the Goutte-d'Or, a name born from public fear and media frenzy. The nickname evoked a fairy tale monster, a child-devouring ogress, because the reality of her crimes was too disturbing to process. By tying her to the working-class Goutte-d'Or district, the press made the horror feel close to home for ordinary Parisians. This label transformed her from a suspect into a myth, fueling public hysteria and shaping her fate long before any verdict. The nickname sold newspapers, but it also made a fair trial nearly impossible. It reveals how societies use myth to explain evil they can't comprehend. Jeanne Weber's story became a cautionary tale, blurring the line between reality and folklore. The Ogress of the Goutte-d'Or remains a symbol of how fear and legend can shape justice. In early 1900s Paris, high child mortality was a tragic norm. Diseases like diphtheria and tuberculosis claimed countless young lives, especially in poor neighborhoods. When a child died suddenly, doctors often blamed illness, not foul play. Jeanne Weber's crimes were hidden by this grim reality. Her victims' deaths seemed like just more sad statistics. The lack of modern forensic tools made it nearly impossible to distinguish between natural death and murder by suffocation. Only when a pattern of tragedy followed Jeanne did suspicions arise. The era's acceptance of frequent child death created a blind spot, allowing her to evade detection. Investigators were not careless, they were limited by their time. Jeanne Weber's story is a stark reminder that crime is shaped by its social and medical context. The fight for truth was as much against the era's sorrowful reality as against the killer herself. Jeanne Weber's most chilling weapon was trust. She was not a stranger but a sister-in-law, aunt and babysitter, welcomed into homes by those who loved her. Her role gave her unsupervised access to children, and her quiet, caring facade disarmed suspicion. When tragedy struck, families grieved, never suspecting the helpful relative in their midst. The idea that a trusted caregiver could be a killer was almost unthinkable, creating psychological barriers to suspicion. This denial allowed her to move from family to family, leaving devastation in her wake. In an era without background checks, reputation was everything, and Jeanne weaponized it. Her story is a dark warning. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we trust most. the line between appearance and reality can be terrifyingly thin. The carefully constructed illusion of normalcy began to crack under the weight of mounting suspicion on March 2, 1905. The early days of March were usually filled with the promise of spring, but this year, a dark cloud hung over the Romanet household. It was on this day that Jeanne was discovered in a state of distress, alongside her young niece, Georgette, who was desperately gasping for air, struggling to breathe. The scene was chaotic, filled with panic and fear as family members rushed to help. Adding to the alarming situation, Georgette bore visible red marks on her delicate neck, raising immediate concerns about the cause of her distress. These marks were a stark and unsettling detail that couldn't be easily dismissed. Georgette miraculously survived that initial incident, clinging to life. However, the reprieve was tragically short-lived. Just 9 days later, after another visit with Jeanne, she was found lifeless. The family was devastated, struggling to comprehend the sudden loss. Despite the undeniably suspicious circumstances surrounding Georgette's death, the attending doctor, seemingly eager to find a simple explanation, quickly attributed the cause to diphtheria. Diphtheria was, unfortunately, a common diagnosis at the time, a convenient label that often masked the true nature of many illnesses, especially in an era with limited medical understanding and diagnostic capabilities. Yet, the family's unease continued to grow, festering beneath the surface of their grief. The haunting memory of Georgette's desperate struggle for breath, coupled with the disturbing marks on her neck, lingered in their minds, refusing to fade. For the first time, tragedy within the family was not simply perceived as a sad, isolated accident, a cruel twist of fate. Instead, it began to be viewed as a potential piece of a larger, more disturbing sequence of events, a pattern that hinted at something far more sinister. The case of young Georgette served to expose not only the limitations of medical knowledge during that period but also the powerful human tendency towards denial, the desire to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. It was a crucial turning point in the unfolding narrative, a moment of stark realization. Georgette's death served as the first undeniably clear sign that something deeply sinister was indeed at play within the family. Yet despite the growing unease and the mounting questions, the full truth remained frustratingly obscured, hidden behind the era's prevailing assumptions and a significant lack of concrete evidence to support the emerging suspicions. The tragic death of Georgette was certainly not the first instance of unexplained misfortune to befall the family, but it was undeniably the one that initiated the process of connecting the seemingly disparate dots, revealing a disturbing pattern. With each passing day, the slow and painstaking unraveling of Jeanne's carefully guarded secret had irrevocably begun, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose the darkness lurking beneath the surface. After Georgette's death, tragedy struck again. 2 more nieces, Suzanne and Germaine, died within days, both in Jeanne's care and both with similar marks. 3 deaths in one family shattered any illusion of coincidence. Authorities finally launched an investigation uncovering a trail of suspicious child deaths linked to Jeanne, including her own children. The pattern was undeniable, but evidence was subtle. Strangulation left few marks on fragile bodies. Investigators pieced together years of tragedy relying on family testimony and old medical reports. The case shifted from isolated misfortune to a full-blown criminal investigation. Jeanne Weber's secret life was unraveling, driven by the mounting body count and persistent families. The question was no longer what happened, but what did Jeanne Weber do? Jeanne Weber's first trial in 1906 was not just a legal proceeding, it was a spectacle that captivated the nation. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and dread. The public, hungry for details of the horrifying accusations, followed every twist and turn with bated breath. In this initial trial, prosecutors faced a daunting challenge. They relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, piecing together patterns of suspicious deaths, and gathering testimony from family members who had witnessed Weber's unsettling presence around the deceased children. However, crucially, they lacked the kind of hard, irrefutable medical proof that would definitively link Weber to the crimes. The science of forensic investigation was still in its infancy, leaving the prosecution with a difficult path to securing a conviction. Her defense, skillfully crafted, painted a picture of Jeanne as a grieving woman, a figure of sympathy rather than suspicion. They argued that she was merely a victim of tragic coincidence, an unfortunate soul repeatedly present at scenes of inexplicable child deaths. The defense played on the emotions of the jury, suggesting that grief and misfortune had unfairly cast a shadow of doubt upon an innocent woman. Ultimately, swayed by the lack of concrete evidence and the compelling portrayal of Weber as a victim, the jury acquitted her, setting her free despite the lingering unease and unanswered questions. But tragedy, like a dark cloud, continued to follow her. In 1907, just a year after her acquittal, another boy under her care was found dead under highly suspicious circumstances. This time, however, the circumstances were different. The medical examination revealed clear and unmistakable evidence of strangulation, a stark contrast to the ambiguous findings in the previous cases. The noose was tightening around Jeanne Weber. Jeanne was arrested once again, facing renewed scrutiny and public outrage. However, before she could be brought to trial, she was declared insane by examining physicians. Deemed unfit to stand trial, she was sent to an asylum instead of prison, a decision that sparked considerable debate and controversy. Incredibly, and perhaps due to failings within the mental health system of the time, she was later released from the asylum. This decision would prove to be catastrophic. In 1908, she was caught in the act of strangling another child. This time, crucially, there were eyewitnesses who could testify to her horrific actions. The evidence presented at her subsequent trial was irrefutable, the eyewitness accounts damning. Jeanne Weber was finally found guilty of her heinous crimes, but even in the face of overwhelming evidence, her legal team continued to argue for leniency, entering an insanity plea in a desperate attempt to spare her from the ultimate punishment. Ultimately, the court accepted the plea, and she was committed to a mental institution for the remainder of her life, a decision that reflected the evolving understanding of mental illness and its role in criminal behavior. Jeanne Weber's journey through the justice system was a turbulent one, reflecting the era's struggle to comprehend and address such a disturbing case. The legal process swung wildly between acquittal, driven by a lack of definitive proof, declarations of insanity, influenced by emerging psychiatric theories, and finally, a life sentence of confinement within the walls of a mental asylum. Jeanne Weber's trial served as a stark and unsettling reminder of the limitations of both law and science, when confronted with the depths of human depravity and the complexities of the human mind. Her case became a chilling study in the intricate interplay between justice, the legal system, and the challenges of assigning responsibility in the face of unimaginable acts. It also highlighted the evolving understanding of mental illness, forcing society to grapple with the question of how to treat and manage individuals whose actions defied rational explanation. And perhaps most significantly, it exposed the raw nerve of public fear, revealing the anxieties and prejudices that can surface when confronted with the unthinkable. The ogress's fate was ultimately sealed within the walls of an asylum, but the profound and disturbing questions she raised about the nature of evil, the limits of justice, and the fragility of innocence continue to linger in the collective memory. After her final arrest, Jeanne Weber was confined to the Maryville Asylum, her life as a media sensation over. In the asylum, she was just another patient, studied by doctors who struggled to understand her violent compulsion. In 1918, after a decade of confinement, Jeanne ended her own life, strangling herself, echoing the method she used on her victims. Her death was as disturbing as her crimes, suggesting a compulsion she could never escape. The end of her life brought no easy answers. Was she a cunning killer, or a woman driven by uncontrollable madness? Her story left behind a legacy of unanswered questions about evil, mental illness, and responsibility. The ogress's final act was a haunting postscript to a life of darkness. Jeanne Weber's case forced France to confront uncomfortable truths about women, crime, and the limits of science. She shattered the myth of the nurturing woman, introducing the terrifying idea of the female serial killer. Her crimes exposed the need for better forensic methods. Her acquittals were a direct result of science's limitations. The legal drama sparked debate about evidence, expert testimony, and how to handle defendants who might be both criminal and mentally ill. Her story became a catalyst for change in forensic pathology and justice. Ultimately, Jeanne Weber's legacy is one of lost innocence. Her crimes revealed the darkness that can hide behind the most familiar faces. The Ogress of the Goutte-d'Or remains a somber reminder. Evil can be ordinary, and vigilance is always necessary. Her story echoes as a warning to look beyond appearances, and to never underestimate the shadows within our own homes.